So product managers is trying to understand how can I create the best possible customer experience? What are the products that I need to deliver that are user centric versus program manager or project manager is thinking more around, okay, how can I deliver those features working with the stakeholders?
The first thing I would say is start thinking like a product manager. Like, even though you might be in a project management role, start thinking about like, why are we doing this? I'm sure there might be decks available. Product managers would have created some of that already.
A lot of companies are in the midst of moving from project thinking to product thinking because traditionally companies were building the thing right, but even though you build the thing right, if it's not used by anybody, it's not adding any value. So you want to make sure you build the right thing. I think product thinking will enable you to build the right thing rather than build the thing right. Hello everybody, welcome to our podcast Everything Product, the fastest growing product podcast in the world. I am Sid Saladi.
Hey, I'm Srinath.
Hi everyone, this is Phani.
So we are back again with a very interesting topic today. We are going to talk about project thinking versus product thinking. So when we were talking to a lot of project managers, they are actually planning to move to a product management role. But it actually takes a big mindset shift when you're moving from a project manager to a product manager. So we're going to talk about all the different characteristics that takes you to move from a project manager to a product manager. We'll get into the nuances, and we'll also talk about a successful way to transition from a project manager to a product manager in the last. So let's quickly start our discussion today with a basic question. So what is the fundamental difference between a project manager and a product manager, Phani?
Sure, Sidhu. So let's start with this, right? So when you think about a team, this is a typical composition of a team, right? A product manager, a program or a project manager, and then you have multiple engineering teams working on it. And then you'll have different stakeholders who basically tells you the requirements or who will be using the products that you build. And then finally, you might have some external stakeholders as well, which you partner with, integrate with, etc. So when some of these things are going on, a product manager is the first person who goes, talks to the customer, understands what they want, and then finally comes back to this entire group and tells that, hey, based on all of my research, I want to build these features for the customer, and this is the reason why we need to build it. Once that is done, he gives this to the program manager or the engineering team and then talks through all of it. Then program manager is someone who takes all of this, defines the overall plan to say, hey, these are the engineering teams and this is the different timelines involved for each of the engineering. And then let's say if this is the GTM plan, this is how we plan to launch, this is how we plan to enable everyone, do the marketing, etc. Yeah, that's the primary difference you say there, right? A product manager is someone who defines what needs to be done, and a program manager is someone who executes it and finally brings it to a success.
So essentially, Funny, what you're saying is it actually boils down to one basic question a product manager always asks, right? Why? Right? If somebody comes to you to build something, he or she will ask why, right? Then they might answer, it's a very exciting, but why? You actually get to the core problem and figure out what the why is. But going to a project manager, the first question is, right, when do you have to deliver this? When is the time and all of that stuff. So it boils to that single question for a product manager, which is why, and for a project manager, which is when. So let's start with the characteristics and see how each of these roles look at some of those characteristics. Maybe Srinath, I'll go to you, right? Based on your experience, what is one characteristics and how would these roles look at these characteristics?
Yeah, based on my experience, I think the important characteristics and the key differentiation between a product and program manager, that is the user focus. The program managers or project managers focus more on the internal users or stakeholders who are involved with the project versus product manager who is primarily focused on the external users whom he or she is building the product, right? So product managers is trying to understand how can I create the best possible customer experience? What are the products that I need to deliver that are user centric versus program manager or project manager is thinking more around, okay, how can I deliver those features working with the stakeholders? So that's one of the key differentiation. I think it's very important. For folks who are wanting to transition from one to other, one is focused on external, another focused on internal.
Yeah, so just a addition to what you're saying, right? So you're saying that there's a lot of discovery that is there when you're a product manager. You're talking to customers, trying to understand the problems and all of that. But in a project setting, right, it is more scoped out. You know what has to be built, but you're trying to figure out resources, stakeholders, and all of these people to try to execute on what that is needs to be built.
Yeah. So that's where like product is basically trying to identify those features and going and working with the program managers in execution.
Yep.
Awesome.
One thing I want to add here, right? So again, like going back to Sidhu's question of like, what does it take to go from a project manager to a product manager? And the user focus, like when you're talking to an interviewer and when you're explaining that, hey, this is what I did, your answers should be focused on customer who is using your products rather than thinking about your internal stakeholders. You should be always focusing on, hey, as a product manager, I looked at this customer, understood this pain point, and then finally delivered this product.
One thing which I've often seen is, especially when during program project management interviews, when we interview, we are trying to focus more on the execution part. How they are, what are the top critical projects they executed and how they executed, versus product manager going trying to understand more around the product thinking.
Yeah, that's right. And also, it doesn't mean one of them is either superior, right? So, for building a product, we need capabilities from both the sides, right? So, but we have to make sure both sync up in the right way. So, maybe moving to you, Funny, like what is one of the characteristic which you see is important, and how would that differ between these roles?
Another biggest one I would think about when you think about product manager is prioritization, because like I said, if you go back to the team that I talked about, you could have internal stakeholders, external stakeholders, millions of customers who are using your products, which basically means you're getting a lot of data to you and you need to think about what you need to build next. But you're limited on the staffing that you have, which basically means you could only build limited features. So, having that strong mindset of why you're building it and what is the most impactful one is very important for a product manager compared to a program manager. A program manager also looks at the resources, but he only looks at the resources once he knows that, hey, these are the top priorities that we need to execute in the next quarter. And then he looks at streamlining that, making sure the teams are not bogged down with something else, etc. And that's the big difference, the prioritization in terms of what needs to be built versus prioritization in terms of sequencing it and timelining it and resourcing accordingly.
That's right. So maybe let's take an example, Funny, here and talk through the example and how do each of these roles do that, right? So maybe let's assume that we are planning to build a specific application, and this maybe is a fitness application, right? As a product manager, you are essentially trying to say what is the most important feature you'll build into this fitness tracking app. Maybe the step count is the most important thing which we want to build. So you'll actually go back to the engineering team saying that this is what we want to build, because based on the priority, the impact, right, impact, reach, and so which is important to our company, this is actually bringing us there and getting us to the place we want to. And the project manager and the engineering manager, right, work on figuring out how can we resource this, which is trying to allocate engineering resources, and also identify any blockers risks in that format, and also give you a date of when this would be ready, right?
Yep.
Awesome. That sounds good. So let's move on to the next characteristic. So Srinath, do you want to add anything?
I think I also want to talk about how they are measured, like in terms of the effectiveness or success on each role. So one thing, the way I see the product managers are measured more around the business outcomes, the product outcomes for the products that they're launching. For example, if you're working on a payment product feature, did you drive any reduction in fraud rates? Did you drive more adoption for the payment product? That's how they are measured. versus a program manager is measured more on the execution, the operational aspects of the project. Okay, did we deliver this efficiently? Did we save some time? Did we deliver as per plan? How many projects did we deliver within a quarter or within a year? So I think that's one of the key things that I think folks should know. One is more operational focused success. The other one is more around the product level success.
Let's keep moving on to the next characteristic, right? So, Phani, what would that be?
Another thing I could think of is asking hard questions. So, what questions does a product manager need to ask versus what questions that project manager need to ask, right? As a product manager, the hard questions that you need to ask is what do you want or what will make you happy in terms of using the product. And the hard questions that you typically ask to is your stakeholders or your customers. You sit with your customers to understand what are the different issues that they're going through. And many a times, even if they don't tell you, your mindset has to be, hey, how can I understand from this person just by observing things and stuff. And the hard questions you will also ask to is your internal stakeholders. Let's say if you're someone who's building products for your operations teams, then what you do is you sit with them to understand, hey, what are the things that is time consuming for you and how can I solve those things for you. On the other hand, the hard questions that a project manager typically asks is to each of the individual teams that are building it. So he comes to the engineering team to say, hey, how much more time do you need? Can you do it within this limited time? Or if there are very critical timelines that you're looking at, can you actually work on the weekends? Can you actually work in the evenings to make some of these things happen? These are very hard questions that you can need to ask in order to deliver a product, but that's what a program manager or a project manager is supposed to do. Same thing, let's say if there are dependencies and stuff, they have to ask those right questions to say, hey, this team is dependent on you. I want to make sure you prioritize this to get it done so that we deliver the overall project on time.
That's right. So product manager has to be on his or her toes every time when they are interacting with the customer, trying to find what the problem is, right? So asking the right questions will get them to the right spot where they understand the correct problem which has to be solved. But while in a being on a project manager shoes, right, it's more on the lines of asking people the right questions so that they can get the execution done in the right time. So that's also hard, right? It's not easy to ask people these questions and try to understand why they're not able to do certain things and how can they prioritize these things to get those things done on time.
Both of the roles are enablers, right? So product managers also enable people to get something done. Project managers also enable people. So a biggest skill that you need to probably take here is people management or people skills, where you need to convince the people without authority. None of those people would be probably reporting to you, but you still have to work with all of them, make sure they understand the criticality of it, and make sure to deliver the initiatives. So both of them take the responsibility in making that happen.
And irrespective of whatever traits you have as a product or project manager, you have to influence without authority to get your things done and enable teams, right?
Yep.
Okay, so moving on to the next trait here, Srinath. So what would that be?
Another thing which I believe that is important is to understand the differences, especially the way the folks handle constraints, right? So in this world, I mean, in reality, there's only limited bandwidth, right? So as a product managers, when you are asking the right questions, you are trying to understand what those priorities are in terms of product features. You need to think about the constraints that you have, whether it's engineering bandwidth, research bandwidth, and all that stuff, and to come with those priorities. Versus a program manager is looking at constraints more around the stakeholders' bandwidth. It's more is looking more around the resources, the capacity that we have, and can we deliver the priorities that the product manager has come up with. So that's one of the important distinction I think folks need to know. One focuses on, if I have 6 priorities, what are the top 3 I can pick, and program manager tries to figure out, okay, if I have 3, how can I deliver based on the resources I have.
That's right. And also the product and program always work very closely together, right? Because either of them failing will actually fail the product. So you have to basically make sure you're doing the right job in whichever lanes you're in.
One thing which I want to
Yeah.
add emphasis here is the I think you guys touched on a bit. The one focuses on why, right? Asking those right questions, and if program manager is not thinking on that aspect, then we may go in completely wrong direction. The programmer.
That's right. And there is also a cultural aspect to it, right? So, some companies orient towards more of a product thinking and some companies orient towards a project thinking. So, Funny, can you talk us or walk us through, what are the differences between both of these cultures and what do you think is superior than the others?
Sure, Sidhu. So let's take a couple of examples, right? So let's say you're a pharmaceutical company and you're trying to implement ERP solution for your company. Okay. So ERP solutions have been in the industry for quite some time. You're probably not innovating anything new, or you're not coming up with any new ideas or solving any specific customer problems. All you need to do is, in order for you to do enterprise resource planning, you need a software. So this goes to like complete execution. So at this point you probably don't need someone who needs to put their thinking hat, understand the problems and execute it. At this point all you need is probably a program manager who can work with some external stakeholders and build this product and launch it. So that's where a program manager plays a very key role. But let's imagine on the other hand, right? Let's say you're building a completely innovative product which uses very smart thinking of understanding what exactly the customer wants or the stakeholders want and then build it. That's when you need a product manager. And many times what we also see is there could be initiatives where only one person is needed or not both. So when we think about it, so both of them are executioners, like they clearly understand what is needed and they successfully execute it. So that's another big difference that people need to take in mind, that are you building something that's fairly new or you don't clearly understand, then you need a very strong product manager who can do that. Or are you building some product which has already been there in the industry and all you're doing is execution, then you probably don't need a product manager, where you just have a program manager or a project manager to deliver it.
That's right. And
Yeah.
I also see that, right, like it might be different for different products, right? Like if it's an old product or a new product, or it's an execution heavy product, it might vary whoever we might need. But there are also companies, a lot of companies are in the midst of moving from project thinking to product thinking, because traditionally, companies were building the thing right, but uh, you know even though you build the thing right, if it's not used by anybody, it's not adding any value. So you want to make sure you build the right thing. I think product thinking will enable you to build the right thing rather than build the thing right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Likewise, even in startups, right? There are only limited funds. And oftentimes we see there's only one role where product manager is basically doing program management, project management stuff as well. So yeah, one is more tactical versus the product management is more probably creative.
Cool. Now that we went into some of the traits and discussed like what are the different traits and how would each of these roles look at these traits, right? So if I were to pick a career path, right, like what would the differences or the nuances of that would be, right? Like how would I be a good project manager, or how would I be a good product manager? Like what are those transferable skills?
So the way I would say for that is, as a project manager, if you are someone who can push people to make things happen and you're not very keen on thinking about how it's going to impact the customer, how it's going to impact the industry, etc., and you are someone who can actually push people to get stuff done, then you're going to be an excellent project manager or program manager. And you shouldn't be hesitant in asking typical questions. I see that meme, right? Is it done yet? Is it done yet? Is it done yet? If you're okay to ask that question like 50 times on a weekly basis, then you're going to be an excellent project or a program manager. On the other hand, in order for you to be an excellent product manager, then going back to what Sito said, like, why are we doing this? Why do we have to do this? Who are we solving this for? Like, what exactly do I need to build to solve that problem? If you want to just keep thinking like that and then identify those problems and then solve for it, then you're going to be an excellent product manager.
Do you have any takeaways, Srinath?
Yeah, for me, I think people have to be. I think they have to think through before which career they want to go, product management, project management. So I think if folks like to solve challenging problems, talking to customers, understanding their priorities, being close to the customer, and I think there's a lot of creativity and problem solving needed. So if you are the one who likes to do all that stuff, then I would choose a product manager role versus a program manager or project manager is more operational or tactical. Like the problem is defined, the scope is defined, you're going to go and take and execute it. So for folks who like creativity than operational, then I wouldn't choose project management. But if folks like operational or tactical work, then I would choose project management or program management.
Awesome. So, we also, said that a lot of people are planning to transition from project management to product management, right? So, if you were to give them two suggestions, what would they be, right? Like,
Um, the first thing I would say is start thinking like a product manager. Like, even though you might be in a project management role, start thinking about like, why are we doing this? I'm sure there might be decks available. Product managers would have created some of that already. Like, start thinking in that direction. And if you have opportunities where you can take within your current role, where you can identify those, create some documents, talk to people, start to do some of those things so that you can easily transition. Another big mindset shift that you'll have to do is in the interviews, where you'll have to talk about customer, and the lens that you need to take is what is the problem that you're solving, rather than thinking about, hey, I drove 5 teams, I created the timelines, looked at the resources, looked at the budgets, etc. So those are the two things that I would say.
what about you, Srinath?
I mean, I will say for the folks who are looking at this both, roles, product management and program management. I mean, I'll first ask them depending on what their interests are, like the things that all we spoke about, right? If they are more focused on users, then try to, they talking to customers, then I would ask them to choose product versus a project management, program management. If they're more they like working with internal stakeholders, then I would choose that part. So, and also, and interview prep for both is completely different, I think, as Funny said. So, one, if you are going for a program and a project management interview, try to focus more on some of the key large programs that you drove end to end. In terms, focus more on the execution part, like how you worked with these teams, how you collaborated with these teams, how you created a project plan to deliver it, versus a product management interview which is more focused on your critical thinking. Okay, how did you identify the customer problems and how do you prioritize on that problems? So that's what I would say.
That's right. Yeah, and also, right, if you ask me if you're already a project manager and doing some sort of execution work and want to transition into a product manager, I would say that, right, like for everything we are trying to execute on, right, try to get to that point of why even you are being asked to execute on this. What is the rationale behind it? What was the logic behind prioritizing some of this, and how did the product manager go into understanding what the user needs are, and how did he or she end up fixing on this specific problem, and why do you want to solve it in this certain way, and all of that. So I think doing these probing questions will help you understand all of the whys and why somebody came up with the decision of executing a certain thing which you are actually asked to execute on. So I think that's the starting point, and then I would say you also start getting more involved in the customer process, sitting with a product manager in the interviews or surveys and all of that stuff. So that will also help you familiarize more with the why side of things, and also the customer side of things. So I think starting there, you could actually develop all of the skills of a product manager and move into a product management role. Awesome. So yeah, we went into a lot of details of project management and product management. How can a project manager become a product manager? So if anybody has any questions regarding project management roles or product management roles, please leave a comment in the description below. Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.